wait a minute, how many careers has this guy had?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what you say, that you said something like you have hobbies that get out of hand.
Yeah.
And then that sort of turns into like a 15-year career, give or take.
That was the theater. Yeah, that was my hobby that got out of hand.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Pierre Sondergaard. I'm a texture artist in visual effects. Welcome to my podcast. Let's be honest, a life and a career as a working artist can be very fulfilling, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's filled with challenges and obstacles, and the path forward is not always clear or simple. On this podcast, we discuss all of this openly and honestly with experienced artists who have already walked that road. That's why I call it the naked texture artist. There are many podcasts that focus on and celebrate all the big achievements in visual effects and animation. But my career as a texture artist has not been one unending victory lap. So personally, I'm more interested in learning how my fellow artists handle the hard things, when things don't work, when things break, or when we're expected to produce the impossible. All of that stuff that takes place behind the curtain. So I invite you to join me on this journey. Hopefully together we can learn from the artists who went before us, save ourselves some scars and some tears, and increase our joy as working artists. Welcome to the Naked Texture Artist.
Do you know Martin? Probably not. You definitely know his work. And all the rest of it, I really think you should know too. So I'm really excited about introducing Martin Murphy to you. I think it was favorite son of the show, Chris Nichols, Mr. Thanos, who brought Martin to my attention. Yes, Martin did really solid texture work on Jurassic World and many other blockbusters over 16 years with ILM. He was lucky to bridge that gap between the mythical pre-Disney ILM and what ILM has since become since the Disney takeover. But when Chris mentioned that Martin had since left a very successful visual effects career to pursue a much more uncertain career as a traditional artist, that's when my ears pricked up. It doesn't take too long in visual effects to realize that what we do is basically to execute another person's creative vision. Sure, it has moments of creativity here and there, but you are very much a foot soldier carrying out orders. If you want personal creative fulfillment, that's on you to do on your own time. So you often find the professionals of visual effects pursuing hobbies or other avenues on the side to work on their personal creative projects to sate that artistic hunger. Occasionally, some of those grow big enough to start gaining some traction. That was what I was discussing with Jamie Chigot, who has a successful side job as an illustrator of children's books, while being a texture supervisor in her day job. Martin has taken it that one massive step further. Despite being at the top of his game, he has bowed out, left visual effects, and set out on a traditional fine arts career. I mean, in terms of raw artist stuff, it doesn't get more hardcore than that. He has returned to the source. If we weren't fortunate to push a mouse or a stylus around and earn a living through mouse clicks, and were to be judged solely on our pure raw artistic ability, how many of us would be able to pay our bills? Martin had the courage and the artistic drive to take that leap to see whether he would sink or swim. How many of us can say that? Am I going to be painting textures till they carry me out in a pine box? I hope not. Hey, don't get me wrong, as much as I love texture work, I still dream of a different future. A retirement, somewhere by the sea, probably the Mediterranean, where I will be painting my post-impressionistic landscapes and squint at the sun as I stare at the waves. But that is all just talk. Martin walks the walk. And I need to understand what that life is like. I'm certain you want to know too. Before we start, just a small note. Before visual effects, Martin had a career as a dancer on Broadway-style shows. Yeah, a man of many talents. He is nothing if not interesting. Thank you so much for being on time early. I mean, we still have a minute to burn here, you know? And doing a trial run yesterday or something, I love it. I love it. Being prepared, you know? That's like, you know, like that's the old school professionalism. That's just, you know, you cannot take for granted, but don't always happen these days. People dotting their I's and crossing their T's.
Yeah.
So we don't know each other, Martin.
How is that?
It's crazy because we've been the same places, but just at different times. So my name is Mark. I'm from Denmark, living in Canada for the past soon 10 years. And before that, London, England. And before that, many other places. And been a texture artist for 12 years. And I just love the hell out of texturing. I don't know. It just has that right thing that just scratches my itch. And because of this, I can't stop myself from talking about texturing. So this is where this podcast comes from. And so I had a guest. I want to say that it was probably Chris Nichols, Australian guy out of Vancouver more recently. And we were just talking about who else should I talk to. And then he's like, do you know this guy, Martin Murphy? I'm like, no. Oh yeah, he did all the dinosaurs on the sort of the second, what should we say, generation of Jurassic Park, and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, okay, talk to me. And then now he's a fine art painter as well. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm really listening because, you know, in visual effects there are many texture artists, and all of them are unique. But people that sort of tap back into that traditional art, and that's for me a very interesting space that some artists do and some don't, because we have a lot of technology that can do some heavy lifting for us. So that's when I started researching you, and I'm thinking, this is good stuff, you know? And then I learned furthermore that you've left visual effects altogether to embark on that elusive artist career that probably a lot of visual effects artists are quietly dreaming about, but maybe never managed to make that jump. So that's why I wanted to talk to you. And thank you for accepting to spend a little time together.
Oh, absolutely. I will tell you all the scary, horrible things as well as the good stuff about, you know, leaving visual effects. And, you know, it's not all flower meadows and, you know, slow motion running into the sunset. Leaving
hair waving like a shampoo commercial.
Yeah, exactly. This is more like frying pan into the fire.
Okay, all right. I was listening to a podcast that you did with Framethrowers, an animation podcast. It was very illuminating learning about your history, and I was sort of like trying to add. There was one point you mentioned when you're leaving dancing.
Wait a minute, how many careers has this guy had?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what you say, that you said something like you have hobbies that get out of hand.
Yeah.
And then that sort of turns into like a 15-year career, give or take.
That was the theater. Yeah, that was my hobby that got out of hand.
I feel like we could talk texturing for a really long time, and that could be really interesting. But I would love to do a little bit of that, but also talk about that art career that I think a lot of visual effects artists are sort of dreaming of. Maybe I can turn this hobby that I have into a profession. Maybe I can, because I think visual effects for the past 20 years has given creative people a way to make a living at a reasonable pace and a reasonable salary level and so on. Maybe you're never going to be a millionaire, but here is a place where you can make a living and still feel a little artistic along the way. But over the past couple of years, that's become an incredibly stressful place to be in, I think. And a lot of people that have been there for some time are just bitter, angry, hollowed out husks of, yeah, I mean, you're pointing at yourself, and I have also been in that space many times, and you kind of feel you have to take a break from it, and then you throw yourself back into the fray again, like a soldier that's on a tour of duty, and you go crazy if you stay in that space for too long, you know?
Yeah.
It's not always like that, but it's becoming more and more like that with increasing regularity, I think, which I don't know how you see that, but probably a testament to the larger space that visual effects find itself in.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And I watched it change. I experienced the change over the time I was doing visual effects. So I started in 2002 with ILM. So the only place I've ever worked has been ILM, and it was for almost 16 and a half years. So that's my experience with visual effects. So
did you get to meet
just so
your
you know,
compatriot Steve Spass Williams?
No, he had left
Yeah.
just before
But
I
other
got
than that,
there.
you kind of get
Yeah.
some of the golden years of ILM. Like these are the kind of years that other artists tell me about, and I'm like, oh man, I just missed the boat on that. I did a gig at ILM, and I thought it was going to be like a pilgrimage of all these wonderful things you've heard, and you know what? It was just another gig, another studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was a couple of
recently.
years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I got to work with Steve Walton as my lead.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely
For me,
adore
as a
him.
texture geek, he's just like, he's on Mount Rushmore right there. You know, like the what he did there on
Oh,
Davy
yeah.
Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, which I believe you were a modeler on that show.
Yeah.
That is just,
Yeah.
it looks amazing to this day, and I have no idea how people did that back in those years. It was just, and I tried endlessly quizzing him about it, like an eager, fan trying to suck some goodness out of him, and he was just very dismissive about the whole that whole thing, whatever, But yeah, so, and you must also have worked with Gene Bolt, I would imagine.
Oh my God, another
Yeah.
golden soul. Yeah.
Absolutely. She retired while I was at ILM out in Vancouver, and the list of people wishing her well. My goodness. If you've seen, like, if the president of the United States was in that email thread, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was everybody, every veteran and giant, and oh my goodness, all of them were just falling over themselves with praise for her.
Jean Bolte is this artist that sees the big picture. She's been doing visual effects and texturing, hard surface in, practicals before moving into digital. So she's got this whole perfect view of what to spend time on, what's important, when can I stop painting on this, when is it, ready for that. What to me was a thing I learned from her, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then I just love her use of color. She's very artistic that way, whereas I went in very sort of technical and scientific, and she was just a bit more. Same with Steve Walton too, like two practically painted prop painters gone into learning the computer and doing visual effects through the computer.
I got that from Steve and other people that came in through the original model shop, that they were kind of tolerating digital work. They still wished they were back doing physical models. They just had that distant look in their eyes when they talked about the model shop of old. So well, I couldn't say what that's like, but I've seen that in them, that it gives them something that our digital artists don't really understand.
Yes, it is true. And I have been very lucky that I was at ILM back in the day when they were still making the full-size ships for Pirates of the Caribbean and then blowing them up behind the studio. And the model shop there was open, and you walk past it to get to the cafeteria, to the little restaurant called Noodles there. And we would always peer in, and it was just like magic. You see giant ships and boats and landscapes, and it's pretty remarkable. And that's the stuff everybody thinks of when they think of visual effects, is getting in and painting those plastic models and kit bashing and making your own things. It's just like a little wonderland in that little prop bay there that they were. I shouldn't say little; it's huge. Prop bay where they build everything. So it must be difficult to walk away and they're like, no, you got to learn this software that we wrote. This is back before they even had painting software that was, that could handle the size of the assets that they were creating.
You're referring to ViewPaint or?
Yeah, for ViewPaint. And so it was all built in-house, and it has like, a very simple UI. And if you've never learned a computer before and you had to sort of learn this first, I can imagine it would be frustrating. And just the tablet and looking up instead of looking at what you're doing.
Steep learning curve there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, man, good for you. You must have had some absolute phenomenal years there before visual effects grew up and became what it is today, much more sort of, here's a well-trodden path and, this is how we do things and everything. There's very little pioneering, when you hear of how people had to figure out to do the impossible that had never been done before in those years on every show, pretty much. That must have been an exciting time to be a part of.
It was. And that's, for me, personally, that was my glory days of visual effects were like 2002 to like 2011 or 2010. And then everybody was doing visual effects, and, companies were in San Francisco back then were closing. The smaller companies were closing because newer companies were opening up, and the competition became fierce. And then Disney bought Lucasfilm, of course, and then things really changed for me there. This is where I'm going to get canceled, by the way. So that was
the good thing of having such an incredibly niche podcast is this, that nobody's listening, except for a few diehard nerds, that's sadly the case.
So that to me was a very prominent change because they expanded very quickly and then went to Singapore and then London and then Vancouver, and it just became crazy to manage all these studios and assets and sequels and remakes and reboots and then it's, for me, that's when things changed and it started to become stressful. And other people were stressed, and then you get personalities pushing against each other, and then the whole it was just so different back in the day. And it was probably just because I was new to the visual effects world and it was all new and shiny and exciting. But, it was definitely different. At 6 o'clock, people had families and they left and they went home. And there wasn't this, we'll feed you and work you till 9 o'clock at night sort of culture, which it was when I left. Like, we were doing overtime on day one. In the last film I worked on. It was like, what? That's usually for crunch time,
Yeah. So you've been fortunate to only work at one studio for your entire career. For the people that have had that good fortune, there are so many other things that you've never had to contend with. So I've worked for pretty much every studio going. And my longest gig was a little over 2 years, which is a drop in a bucket compared to the career you've had. So you have a lot of gigs that are a couple of months long, half a year, maybe a year if you're lucky. And there are so many of them that are, as you're saying, they call them 911 shows, as in they're emergencies. And you straight in, first day, overtime, as much as you can manage. And as soon as you can do that in the beginning if you're fairly rested at that point, but you just end up hating your life and becoming bitter and miserable and less effective too, over time. And then when your productivity drops, you're out on the street, again, because, hey, this is a numbers game.
Yeah.
So
it got so bad when I shouldn't say it's bad, but it got so intense when I was still living in California and San Francisco. And I lived 2 blocks from ILM, so I could easily run over, check my renders at midnight or whatever, and then run home. So I had it pretty good location-wise. But things got so bad that I had to hire, which I've never done before, a cleaning person to do my laundry because I just couldn't do it. I would be working, days and nights.
You're having to outsource your life, basically.
Yeah. And I'm like, 1-bedroom apartment, down there working by myself. Only focus is just my job. And it was still too much. So I really...
How do you do that? Because when I was listening to the podcast on Framethrowers, you're talking about how you're going just absolute deep dive, full immersion into learning computer graphics, for example, while you still had your other job in theater. Mm-hmm. And how do you sustain those incredibly intensive periods of just full focus for such long stretches?
I remember when I was in art college and I was doing obviously the college work, and then I was also training as a dancer for theater just on my own. And then I also had a part-time job bussing in tables in a restaurant to earn a living. And I remember I would drag my butt home at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get up to go to school in the morning. How I would never do this again. And I did it for years, right? And I said, I'll never do it again. But it always seems to be my
you can do that
life.
When you're 20,
yes.
You have that magic sauce there that's the hormones, all that indestructible goodness. But later in life, I mean, I don't know how. So maybe it was at that point, it's just habit. It's, I don't know, old man strength. It's just been building up in you over the years, and just, I don't know.
Yeah. And then, I also absolutely love it.
Yeah, you need that. You need that.
It is my only driving force. It's my passion. Ever since I could walk, art has been I've never had a real job. I've always been in the arts doing artsy stuff. So it is my food, my everything. So the air that I breathe is art. Everything I look at is inspiration, or something I can critique in my mind or something. So that keeps me going, and a finished piece to me is lovely. I love that feeling of creating something and letting it free out into the world. I love that. So that keeps me going. But then, things like your age let you down. Like in the theater at 37, my body was too sore. I had to just walk away from that. And then...
Would you have continued? Would you have continued otherwise? Or would that... there wouldn't have been like a natural point where you kind of feel like, I've done it. I'm full. I'm not hungry for this anymore. I've done it. Or...
because a lot of my friends went into directing and choreographing and producing and still stayed in the theater industry, I guess. But I had certain things in my mind that I wanted to do. I wanted to do this show and this show and this show, and I wanted to go on a tour, and I wanted to work in the States and all that stuff. So I did that. So I remember I always tell the story about being in the company office at, I was working on a show called Sunset Boulevard in Toronto. And somebody said, "Hey, Martin, look, you're an artist. Look what you can do on the computer." And it was just, what's that called? Something Paint or...
We're talking about the old Windows Paint that was awful in awful color tones, just garish and horrible. My goodness.
The airbrush was just little pixels and stuff like that. Yeah. But somebody showed that to me, and I was like, what? You can do that? That is so cool. No fumes. I can just shut it down the end of the night. I don't have to have a studio full of art supplies.
Wait a minute. Was this the first time you were sort of exposed to the power and magic of a computer? What year would that have been? Like
95.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Right, yeah.
Because I bought my first Mac in 96.
Okay.
And then my first software was Adobe Illustrator, and then Bryce.
Oh, Bryce. That's a name you don't hear often.
Yeah, that's for those of you
Really good at landscapes, I seem to remember. You could make some very impressive looking mountain ranges on Bryce real quick.
Oh yeah, it was like, $50 or something, or $100 back in the day, and you could just do these fractal landscapes and some simple lighting and skies. But it was my introduction to 3D, and I instantly fell in love. Like that, it was like theater. What, And then I learned that and got,
Really? So am I reading this right from you that in that moment that sort of flushed theater out of your sort of out of your heart, so to speak,
yeah.
And now you have found another love where you're like, now theater is just a day job to pay the rent.
No, I'm so fickle. I'm like, ooh, something shiny over here, run, and then just drop that. Not quite, but kind of, yes.
Okay. Yeah, sure. It's a gradual thing, I guess.
Yeah, I was always doing two things at the same time. I was doing like painting portraits during the tours and stuff. But that computer art, that to me was fantastic. And I just instantly became obsessed. Back in the day, the computers were really expensive. Just a tiny little computer was $5,000, and the monitor was $5,000, and a printer was $4,000. So it was like super expensive.
Oh yeah.
So I, invested in all that, and I would take it with me on tour.
How on earth does that work? I'm sort of, when you're saying on tour, I'm thinking maybe it's not a bus, but it's a constant. You're constantly traveling around, so you have limited luggage, and your and machines were so big and bulky in those days.
Huge,
oh
yeah.
My goodness.
So I was very lucky that
you must have been popular with the other guys. There comes Martin taking up all the luggage space with his stupid things, or...
Well, my stuff traveled with the set.
Oh.
So I put my boxes in the original computer boxes. So I had 3 boxes, the computer, the monitor, and the printer. And they very nicely shipped those with the set. So I didn't have to worry about it. And then we all had sort of plastic bins, buckets, 1 per person, and so you can throw as much as your junk in there, and they went with the set as well. So you just had to carry your carry-on or your clothes, and then the production would ship your life from city to city.
I mean, you really worked hard for that time of educating yourself. I mean, never mind the time you had to spend on the box, but all of this, you put a lot of legwork into that.
Yeah, I would finish my shows at 11 o'clock at night. I would come home and I would buy all the how-to books, like the Photoshop Wow book.
Yeah.
And
I had those.
Yeah. And I put them on my lap and I would open page 1. I'm like, okay, let's learn this software. So I had a great library of books and magazines, and I was pretty early on getting on the internet back in the day. I was getting teased by people. Oh, you're such a nerd. You're on the internet and everything. But who's laughing now?
Absolutely.
And people would laugh because I wouldn't go out. I would be at home working on the computer and teaching myself and learning. And, I'd start a website and start putting my stuff out on those, like Bryce Landscape, I don't even know what you want to call them, online magazines or whatever. And so I'd sort of get my work out there. And then lo and behold, one year I actually did the box cover for Bryce.
Nice.
For the snowy one with the white mountains. It was a 911 job, and it was like he sent me an email and said, "Oh, Martin, we like your work, but we need a cover by the morning.
Ooh.
Is it possible you can?" And I said, "Well, I don't have anything that isn't used." So I stayed up all night, and I got this, on my little tiny computer with my little tiny monitor that could barely render it, in the resolution they needed for the morning. So I stayed up all night and I sent it to them, and they took it, and it's on the box.
That's really
so
cool.
that was like a full circle moment.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. But I was obsessed, and then just teaching myself how to use a computer, and then just putting my stuff online. And then this lovely, amazing company called Digital Extremes out of London sent me an email saying, "Hey, do you want to work in games?" And I am
really
not,
they found you.
So I'm not a gamer. I don't even own a game. I know nothing about them, but it was 3D work and I was poor. So I said, absolutely, because I'd left the theater at the time. So they were wonderful. They taught me so much and they were so patient. But I was there kind of mostly for 2D stuff, texturing of characters.
Okay, I was going to say Bryce wouldn't have held muster there. What would they have used? 3ds Max maybe, or something like that? 3D Studio Max was a favorite among the games developers for quite a while.
The animator used Max, but they used Lightwave.
Oh, really? Okay.
For most of their stuff.
Another blast from the past.
Yeah, so all my 3D work that I used to get into ILM to make my reel was all Lightwave, where you could model, rig, texture,
It was
render.
the first sort of, or one of the first series packages that had a bit of everything where,
yes,
I mean, Bryce, you could make your landscapes, but you couldn't do character animation or, and many of the software of that day, it seemed to me like they had a, let's say, 3ds Max had a really clever polygon modeler, and then they sort of tacked on some render options and whatever. But the centerpiece was really, it wasn't like everything integrated. Lightwave seemed to have a different approach there, where you could kind of do a bit of everything in it without having to.
And it was affordable.
Yeah.
If I remember, Max was really, really expensive.
Oh, it was the price of a car. Are you kidding me? And Maya was not cheaper neither.
Oh God, yes, that's right. Maya back in the day was what, $4,000 or something, or
that was crazy. It was. I mean, I didn't pay for any of that.
Oh wow, good for you.
I knew how to get learning editions before there were such a thing.
I was foolish. I just spent money on all that software like a fool.
Oh my goodness, that was expensive.
I know. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars learning all this stuff. But the gaming was great, but I wasn't a gamer. So I did 2 years with them and then hit a wall and was like, okay, I got to go because I want to go into movies. So I said, I'm going to spend, a month and make a reel.
So let's say, what year would that have been, just to put a sort of a pin in the timeline?
2001.
2001.
So I did 2000 and 2001.
Jurassic Park comes out in 98, was it? Or something like that?
The first one?
Yeah?
93.
Oh, sorry. My goodness. I need to... In all of this, were there no sort of moments where let's say you're in the cinema, you're watching something like that, and you're thinking, whoa, this is unbelievable. I want to do that. Or I didn't know you could do that. Were there no such moments like that for you along the way?
God, yeah.
That
all
sort
the
of
time.
So when you're saying games, thank you very much, but I want to move over to movies now. What were there any such experiences that sticks out in your mind that sort of like made an impression on you, where you're like, wow, what I'm doing can also be used over here in a film sense?
You mean the art world?
Yeah. So any inspirational sort of film moments, visual effects wise or otherwise?
Well, the one film that I saw that I walked in and came out a different person was Jaws but that was, back in the 70s. I was a teenager and that blew my mind. It was like, I wanted to make, visual effects for film. When I was like 12 or whatever. Literally walked out a different person. It was unbelievable.
I would say for a 12-year-old to watch Jaws in those days, that, I don't know, ill-advised, that would have been a frightening experience. No?
I was nauseous.
Yeah, my goodness.
It was first time seeing gore.
Maybe we're laughing at it now, but I do remember that experience.
Yeah. And then, of course, Jurassic Park, which changed the landscape for everything. The first thing I made when I got Lightwave was a dinosaur.
Oh.
So the first thing I tried to make anyway. It's on my little reel of this dinosaur walking. It was textured and I rigged it and did the whole animation and all that stuff. So I guess Jurassic was the first. That's, I think, very common. I think Jurassic changed a lot of people's lives and got tons of artists interested in, visual effects and computer imagery.
There were, parallel to all of this, there was sort of a home computer scene that people may or may not have been a part of. So I joined the computer world in the mid to late 80s home computers. They're
Wow.
8-bit computers, and at that point, people are just kind of laughing at it. And it's like, what is this for? People have these crazy notions of, oh, they're going to take over our jobs, or they're going to whatever. But at the same time, they had such little actual use that people were just dismissing it as a kid's toy. But so they were mostly used for games, but there were also a lot of people that spent time making digital artwork on them and just trying to, a lot of those people are now working in the industry today as, maybe they are writing render software, So it was very technical at first. The tools were incredibly limited. And then the next generation, the 16-bit computers, we had fantastic paint tools there that were much better than what Windows would put out later that you saw, such as Electronic Arts, the big games company, had a paint package called Lux Paint, and I spent so much time with that. And again, it was kind of seen as a dead end because it was like, sure, you're making a pretty picture on a computer, but what can that really be used for unless you are in game development? And there was no such thing. Me growing up in a small country in a dirt town, there was, these things were made elsewhere. It was none of your concern. But then when Jurassic Park comes, that's sort of like the moment where all of us that were very, very early adopters of some kind of computer graphics, we kind of said, see, it can be used for something. And that was a real eye-opener for the rest of the world and for us, sort of confirming that this was good for something, and we had known all along that this was going to come good one day. But it seems like you were not at all part of that sort of computer evolution until the mid-90s, where you have this sort of drops into your lap. Yeah, there we are. Different paths.
Yes.
I'm sitting here like biting my tongue because I have to talk about your paintings.
Oh,
you have fantastic technique. My goodness. You are brilliant painter. We can all argue over subject matter and do you like this topic or that topic or whatever. That's everybody have a different flavor, different taste. But your technique is sublime. Where does this come from? This is you just thought you sprung out of the womb fully formed with an easel in one hand and a brush in the other. Or how has your evolution as like those raw traditional art skills, how have they progressed over time for you?
It's always been there, I guess. It's always been.
That's not the answer I was hoping for.
Yeah, sorry.
Martin will be back in a future episode. Thanks for spending a little bit of your day with us. We have a tiny bit of housekeeping to do on the way out. If this episode has been helpful to you, why not share the podcast with your colleagues and friends? If you'd like to support the podcast, I'd appreciate if you bought me a coffee. You can do that on Ko-fi. That is spelled ko-fi.com/The Naked Texture Artist. One word. If you have suggestions, comments, or questions, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop me a line on thenakedtextureartist@gmail.com. That is The Naked Texture Artist written out in all one word @gmail.com. As I mentioned, having a busy day job in visual effects means my release schedule for this podcast can be a bit irregular. So if you don't want to miss out, subscribe to The Naked Texture Artist wherever you get your podcasts. Or follow the podcast on the socials, then you'll be alerted when the next episode drops. The music in this episode was Awake by Tycho. Nick Sifoni helped put the sound together, and everything else was done by me, your host, Mark Pierre Sondergaard. Speak to you soon.